Pavarotti, the film, is an often spine-tingling, emotionally charged biopic about a very big-hearted, brave, but ultimately flawed man. Pavarotti is portrayed as a very characteristically Italian, a big lover of his food.
Oh, you like to have a hotel room with a kitchen, isn't that right?
A very vivacious and friendly and sociable character.
Come vorresti essere ricordato tra 50 anni?
The Irish premiere for Pavarotti was held in the iSense Theatre, which is behind me in the Odeon Point Square, and iSense was chosen to suitably accommodate Pavarotti's towering big voice, and it certainly did capture that. Also, the iSense's enormous 4K giant screen, possibly the biggest in the country, was very suitable for capturing that big, expansive opening shot, which is Pavarotti venturing down the Amazon, a theatre literally in the middle of the jungle where Puccini once famously sang 100 years previously. And that big, expansive shot suitably sets the scene for a film which is about Pavarotti, where everything is big physical presence, big lover of life, lover of women, and where everything is more, and everything about his life is maxed out. When he goes in the pursuit of women, he overdoes that. When he finally goes into philanthropic ventures, he certainly pursues that with a certain vigour as well. And there's a lot of love and passion and music in this man and the film, the biopic, which
my mother says, my son sings with a beautiful voice. I said, Mama, you say that because you are my mother. No, because I don't say that when I hear your father.
There is also evidence of a big ego present within Pavarotti, but it is, however, tempered by a certain childish sense of humour and innocence, which allows us to forgive him that sense of ego and entitlement, which certainly is justified in terms of his singing and the amount of pleasure that he brought to millions of people worldwide also. But certainly in that opening shot, when he does go into the theatre, which is in the middle of nowhere near the Amazon River, who's letting him into the theatre doesn't recognise him and says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Luciano Pavarotti." It has that certain "do you not have any idea who I am" type opening to it, so that does set the scene in terms of ego. And the film does go through a certain voyage and an arc in terms of how much we appreciate Pavarotti and perhaps how much we question some of his more flawed characteristics. But overall, it's hard not to like this guy.
My father was a tenor. You always do what your father is doing, so I'm a little tenor.
There are two particularly electric moments in this film, set to the soundtrack of Pavarotti's towering voice throughout. The first is a particularly memorable moment in history during the World Cup in Italia '90, when the three tenors were brought together to perform one amazing gig in Rome during the World Cup in Italia '90. And that moment captured in the film captures a really electric moment where you have the three big egos and big voices and big tenors are gathered together on the same stage, and you have that subtle interplay, that tension between the egos, but also that playfulness between them as they share the limelight and they try to outdo each other. And it's a bit reminiscent of watching The Who at Woodstock, where there's this constant need to outdo the other person and grab the limelight. But as they say themselves, it pushes them to do it better, pushes them to exceed each other and to make the performance all the more electric and better.
In Rome, three of the world's greatest tenors on the same stage for the first time.
Luciano called me, "Get well soon, I don't have competition."
The second electric moment in this film is one which from an Irish perspective is particularly poignant, and it's when Pavarotti pursues Bono and almost terrorises him over a couple of months in order to write a song for him. And Bono obliges, and it's quite poignant in that Bono recalls his own father, who had passed away, Bob Hewson, was a tenor himself, and also Edge's father was a tenor. So he sat down to write this song for this famous tenor, and it became the song Miss Sarajevo, which was dedicated to the Yugoslavian civil war crisis at the time, and it was something that was close to Pavarotti's heart, because at that stage Princess Diana had encouraged him, who became a friend of his, had encouraged him to move in a philanthropic direction, and he entered into that with the same gusto and enthusiasm that he did with all of his other pursuits, including some pursuing women half his age. So that is a particularly electric moment in the film when they perform Miss Sarajevo in Modena in Italy, with Princess Diana in the audience, and Bono and Pavarotti share the same stage, and that is a particularly beautiful moment in the film. In many ways the biopic is split in two halves. When Pavarotti emerges first, as a younger tenor, he embarks on his very traditional career of performing opera, and he becomes known as the King of the High Seas.
Luciano's voice was beautiful.
He was just opening his mouth. Everything was easy.
And he performs in one particular opera, Tosca, where there are 9 high Cs to be hit, and he's famous for hitting all 9 spectacularly. And it's famous also for being an opera where everybody literally dies, including the hero. So quite a stereotypical opera plot in some ways. Then we see his move towards more mass appeal type music, and he hires a lawyer called Herbert Breslin, who even in the film describes himself as the biggest bastard in opera.
Pavarotti would attract hundreds of thousands of people. He became the global rock star.
Mr. Pavarotti.
The suggestion is that because Pavarotti is such a nice guy, that he needs to find the biggest bastard to represent him. So he takes on Breslin. And one of Breslin's first moves is to allow American Express to use Pavarotti in their advertisements, which is a spectacular success in that it works in reverse, in that it advertises Pavarotti more than American Express, and even though he gets a paltry sum for the commission, it was a very wise move commercially. Now, Pavarotti later in his career, he sets up this charity concert called Pavarotti's Friends, and a charity concert, annual concert every year, where he invites rock musicians to perform at it.
He was crushed by injustice.
He became completely obsessed by what he could do for others.
And he receives a lot of backlash from the traditional opera community for doing this, and the purists hate it, not surprising. He develops an unlikely relationship with Harvey Goldsmith, who is an English concert promoter who normally does rock musicians, and he's a bit of a diamond gazer in the film and very entertaining character in that he appreciates himself how unlikely and unusual it is that he became Pavarotti's English manager, whereas he's normally booking rock bands.
I learned to love people.
You're a trusting person?
Are you joking? I will not exist if I don't trust people.
There are a lot of highs and lows in this film. The highs are many. The music being the first one, Nessun Dorma, O Solo Mio, and all of the other songs, the songs that he made famous, and perhaps either made famous or to a broader audience. So the songs, and also his attitude towards life, which is very much the Italian attitude of La Dolce Vita, in terms of loving food, loving women, loving life itself, and that makes the character behind this biopic extremely appealing.
The reason he is great is he lived those songs. The mistakes you've made, the hopes, the desires, all that comes crashing into the performance.
Luciano was the one and only.
There are some lows to the film as well. There's a nice anecdote where a junior executive for Decca Records is sent to Pavarotti's hotel to complain that Pavarotti has breached his exclusive contract with Decca by recording for another record company. And he goes to him and he says, "Pavarotti, I believe you are breaching your contract." And Pavarotti looks at him and says, "Yeah, so I am. And you know what? Life is short." The executive closes his briefcase and goes back to his office, and reports to his superiors that he agrees with Pavarotti. It's subsequently settled by Decca Records buying Pavarotti's wife's record company, and that solves the problem about the exclusive relationship of the recordings. There are some low points in the film as well. We see the backlash that Pavarotti gets for going into the more mainstream, which I think every artist has experienced and goes through when they reach a certain level of fame. Also, there are some poignant moments where he falls out with his daughters due to the affairs that he has, and obviously his wife seems quite forgiving, but one of his daughters was less so.
He led a lonely life, not being home, not being with his family.
Overall, this film is a very gripping biopic with extremely electrifying musical performances, which may or may not be suitable to a general audience. I don't think it's essential to be a lover of opera to enjoy this film, although it certainly would help. What's captured here is a man who loved life, who lived it to the full and put all of his energy and passion into everything that he pursued, certainly into his voice, into his music, into romantic exploits of women, into food, into enjoying his fame, and there's certainly a lot of evidence of that, and in some ways that's incredibly inspiring and uplifting. This will be appearing in Irish cinemas July 15th. He develops an unusual friendship with a manager, an English manager, who is